What is paganism? Etymologically speaking, the word pagan comes from the Latin word paganus, which means country dweller or villager. Hence, the word pagan literally means someone who lives or dwells in the country or in the village. It must be noted that the word paganus has a negative connotation, that is, someone who is not learned or uneducated. During the Roman Empire, when Christianity spread and became its official religion, pagan or paganism became a term used to refer to people who continued to practice pre-Christian polytheistic religions. And for this reason, in the time of the Roman Empire, individuals fell into the pagan class either because they were increasingly rural and provincial relative to the Christian population, or because they were not milites Christi, or soldiers of Christ. Alternative terms in Christian texts were Hellene, Gentile, and heathen. Over time, paganism came to be understood as a religion that represents a wide variety of traditions that emphasize reverence for nature, and a revival of ancient polytheistic and animistic religious practices. Some modern forms of paganism have their roots in 19th century CE. European nationalism, including the British Order of Druids, but most contemporary pagan groups trace their immediate organizational roots to the 1960s and have an emphasis on archetypal psychology and a spiritual interest in nature. But it must be noted that paganism is simultaneously a prehistoric and postmodern religion. In fact, it is as ancient as the fertility symbols associated with the veneration of gods and goddesses tens of thousands of years ago, while its newest forms have emerged as recently as the mid-20th century. Broadly speaking, therefore, paganism encompasses two key characteristics, namely, 1. Religious and spiritual practices concerning the worship of, or devotion to, the earth, the natural world, and/or the manifest physical universe. And 2. Belief in spiritual beings, goddesses, gods, nature spirits, that is, fairies, elves, power animals, and ancestral spirits. Corollary to the two major characteristics of paganism mentioned above are the two central pagan beliefs, namely, polytheism and animism. To the first, one principle of the pagan movement is polytheism, the belief in and veneration of multiple gods or goddesses. Within the pagan movement, there can be found many deities, both male and female, who have various associations and embody forces of nature, aspects of culture, and facets of human psychology. These deities are typically depicted in human form and are viewed as having human faults. They are, therefore, not seen as perfect, but rather are venerated as being wise and powerful. Pagans feel that this understanding of the gods reflected the dynamics of life on earth, allowing for the expression of humor. To the second, a key part of most pagan worldviews is animism, the concept that all elements of the material world, all people, animals, objects, geographic features, and natural phenomena, possess a spirit that connects them to each other. In terms of rituals, pagan ritual can take place in both a public and private setting. Contemporary pagan ritual is typically geared towards facilitating altered states of awareness or shifting mindsets. In order to induce such altered states of consciousness, pagans utilize such elements as drumming, visualization, chanting, singing, dancing, and meditation. American folklorist Sabina Magliocco came to the conclusion, based upon her ethnographic fieldwork in California, that certain pagan beliefs arise from what they experience during religious ecstasy. Paganism's public rituals are generally calendrical, although the pre-Christian festivals that pagans use as a basis varied across Europe. Nevertheless, common to almost all pagan religions is an emphasis on an agricultural cycle and respect for the dead. Common pagan festivals include those marking the summer solstice and winter solstice, as well as the start of spring and the harvest. History of modern paganism. Contemporary paganism is the restoration of indigenous religion, especially that of ancient Europe. Paganism has grown in popularity greatly during the last 100 years. The growth coincides with a decline in Christianity in Europe and the increase in knowledge of past and distant cultures. Renaissance, Reformation, and Rationalism. People in Europe became more aware of the art and philosophy of the ancient world during the Renaissance period around 1500. Documents rescued after the fall of Constantinople in 1453 introduced people to ideas from before the Middle Ages. And although Europe remained Christian, the pagan gods and goddesses of ancient Greece jostled with the patron saints of Christianity on public monument, and classical philosophy began to change the way people thought about ethics and morality. In Britain, the Reformation of the 1600s transformed England from a Catholic country to a Protestant one. The religious conflict that went along with this change led to the persecution of those who didn't fit the desired religious profile. Religious hysteria, disguised as spiritual cleansing, led to some individuals being described as witches. But these people were not part of any religious movement, but merely victims of local feuds and quarrels. A few of them were practitioners of herbal medicine, but most were ordinary, conventional citizens. After the enormous political and intellectual upheavals of the 1600s died away, it became possible to explore ways of thought outside Christianity without fear of instant damnation. And the study of Greek and Roman classics became part of every schoolboy's education. The name Europe, herself a character in Greek myth, replaced Christendom in the mid-18th century. Influenced by the expansion of trade and colonies, and awareness and interest in other cultures and spiritualities grew. This new age of reason during the 17th and 18th centuries became known as the Enlightenment. The revival of traditional cultures and ancient traditions. The first pagan tradition to be restored was that of the Druids in Britain. In the mid-1600s, stone circles and other monuments built 4,500 years previously began to interest scholars. Some thought that the original Druids, that is, prehistoric tribal people of Europe, had built them. In 1717, one of these scholars, the Irish theologian John Toland, became the first chosen chief of the ancient Druid order, which became known as the British Circle of the Universal Bond. By the 19th century, a new outlook was evident as people searched for the fundamental principles of religion by looking at the faiths of different places and times. Helena Blavatsky founded the Theosophical Society in 1875. Its teachings were based on Hinduism, Tibetan Buddhism, Neoplatonic thought, and ancient Egyptian religion. Pagan philosophies, which venerated nature and were polytheistic, began to be seen as sophisticated contributions to contemporary spirituality. Across Europe, people were rediscovering their indigenous cultures. In Northern Europe, there was a growing interest in Saxon and Norse traditions. In England, William Morris translated the Icelandic sagas, and Cecil Sharp collected village dances and songs. In Germany, Schlegel and Schelling in particular were attracted to the nature religion which they saw behind traditional folk customs, and at the beginning of the 20th century, Guido von List pioneered the study of the runes. In Northeast Europe, particularly Lithuania, nationalist movements spread and indigenous languages were reclaimed, traditional tales recorded and the old festivals celebrated. Folk music was part of this reassertion of local identity, preserving traditions which otherwise would have been forgotten. Paganism today. Nowadays, there are many pagan organizations worldwide, most catering for specific traditions such as Druidry or Asatru, but a few, such as the Pagan Federation or the Pan-Pacific Pagan Alliance, representing the entire tradition. Pagan hospital visitors and prison ministers are a recognized part of modern life, and public pagan ceremonies, such as Druid rituals and pagan marriages, or funerals take place, as a matter of routine.